Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Faith and Culture. Thanks for joining us. And today we have a very special guest, 29-year veteran on Border Patrol, retiring as chief of the Border Patrol of all United States, and came to Skyline Church before moving out of communist California before moving out. And he is with us today, Rodney Scott. Thank you for joining us, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me be here today. Appreciate that.
Hey, tell us a little bit about your faith journey. On Faith and Culture, what we're trying to do is really help people understand how believers really integrate their faith into whatever they're doing. And so in the culture and how it really melds with the culture in a sense that we want to influence culture, but yet, we're in it, not of it, all that kind of stuff. So tell us first about your faith journey and kind of how that went.
How much time do you have?
Yeah.
No, real quick, I grew up an Indiana farm kid till I was about 16 in a very strict Nazarene Christian home. My grandfather, he passed away before I was born, but he was a Nazarene pastor. My dad had a regular job, but he also did song evangelism, so I got drug around to Midwest revivals constantly as a child.
A lot of straw, a lot of hay bales
Yes,
and straw everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere, exactly. And every small two-lane road throughout Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, pretty much. I don't really ever know a time where I didn't know or believe there was a God. So I accepted Christ pretty young. But like a lot of people, I think at that age it was really kind of my parents' religion, and it was what you kind of just absorbed. We moved to Arizona when I was in high school, actually the border, Nogales, Arizona. So if you can think about that culture shock. So that's really probably where I rebelled a little bit and started questioning everything a little bit more.
What brought you to Arizona? Was your dad get a job?
My dad was an engineer, and the entire Rust Belt shut down, and all the manufacturing was moving to Mexico. So his job basically moved to Mexico if he wanted to keep it, if you will. So he actually worked in Mexico for 21 years, across the border every single day. American company, but did the manufacturing over there. And then I went from a very rural Midwest Indiana environment to Nogales, Arizona, where I was like one of three kids that really didn't speak Spanish, and it was a culture shock. So like a lot of kids, I rebelled. And during that rebellion time, I think you really do start looking at your own faith. Yeah. I won't go down all the details, but through some pretty good God intervention, I would call it, and some God moments, I reevaluated, and it really actually made me much stronger. And then Christianity became my belief system, not my parents' belief system. Recommit my life to the Lord. Still a little wild through college, but never really got away from the faith itself, if you will. But looking back, I look at a lot of the events that I did not like and did not appreciate then, and realized that God was really kind of setting me up for what I believe is my calling. I got exposed to the U.S. Border Patrol. I would have never even known about the Border Patrol if we hadn't gone to Arizona, if I hadn't gone through a lot of that. I ended up joining the Border Patrol.
How did that happen, though? Like, what do you mean when you got exposed to it? You just saw it happening, and you're like, oh, that's interesting? Or how did it come about?
Yeah, so again, right on the border, and you have Border Patrol there. It was a lot different back then than what people, and especially in Arizona, than what people in San Diego see. What I was exposed to as a high school kid in Arizona was basically a uniform division of the Drug Enforcement Administration. So there was really no talk about illegal aliens. That wasn't an issue in Arizona per se. But there was massive amounts of drug smuggling. So you'd see Border Patrol agents in these off-road vehicles, on ATVs, on horseback. They had a highway checkpoint. You'd see vehicle pursuits, all the things that most kids look at a video game now for adrenaline. But I was watching it firsthand. I was always, again, farm kid, so I liked being outside. I kind of knew I always wanted to do something outside. And they also had an awesome flight program back then. They had their own Air Force. And you had to be an agent in the Border Patrol for 3 years before you could apply to be a pilot. So I talked to some people, and I'm like, this looks like a really good combination. So I actually went to college to be a pilot, but specifically to try to get a job in the Border Patrol. Got on my flight training, a little bit of corporate flight time, and then I joined the Border Patrol. But after 3 years, I got assigned to San Diego, by the way. That's how I ended up here the first time. After my 3 years...
How do they assign you? Do you get to pick at all, or is it just...
I think it's sort of. They fool you. So they say, hey, pick your three first choices or whatever. And I literally put on there Arizona, Texas, and anywhere other than California, and they sent me to Southern California.
Wow. So did you not want to go just because you knew it was just what? Why didn't you want to go California?
Cost of living and what I knew about the Border Patrol's sites, specifically the stations in California, they were more in the city. And I was looking for a job like literally in the middle of nowhere. I was ready to go to like Yuma. Actually, that would even be a big town. I was looking at small towns in Texas, Arizona. That was just kind of more what I was used to. But I got assigned to Imperial Beach here in San Diego. Wow. And anyway, it worked out good. 3 years goes by, and I really, really did enjoy the job. And I decided that I couldn't be that mobile flashlight just shining down on the people having all the fun. Right? Mm-hmm. People don't like to hear about law enforcement being fun, but if it wasn't, no one would apply. Right. Let's just be realistic. Yeah. And I'll jump up to the faith stuff here too, if you will, how it kind of tied together. Like right out the gate, it was just a job to me. I didn't really understand how my belief system and the job are going to, I would call it, collide later in life.
Were you, so at Imperial Beach, were you doing helicopter? What were you doing?
No, I was a Border Patrol agent on the ground.
So you're on the ground?
Right on the ground. One of my first assignments, you guys have probably all seen it on the news, is sitting out at, we call it Whiskey 15, but it's basically Borderfield State Park, right on the actual border. But when I started, there was no surf fence. There was no delineation of the border actually on the beach or out into the water. So it was just chaos kind of every single day. And again, put it into context, I came out of Arizona, I was expecting to like take down drug smugglers and that kind of stuff. I didn't even really know there was an immigration problem. But when I joined, it was 1992. San Diego was insane, kind of like what's going on in the rest of the country right now. We were making like 1,000 arrests with 30 guys in an 8-hour shift every night and watching 10 people get away for every person that we caught. It was chaos. Those of you in San Diego now, they don't really understand how far we came, how much we secured that border, made Tijuana safer, San Diego safer. But anyway, I was on the ground and taking down groups of like 50, 60 people just with your partner, vehicle pursuits, all kinds of stuff. So I wasn't ready to be the guy shining a flashlight down on that. And I never went back. I ended up getting promoted, moved around a few times. And then 9/11, not to jump too far forward, but I was transferred back out. I was in Arizona when 9/11 hit. And that kind of changed everything from my career path and even the way I looked on things. Because the only two things I thought about as a Border Patrol agent, or really the country did prior to 9/11, was narcotics and illegal migration, meaning what you normally see here. Primarily, Latin America, Mexico, triangle countries. And that was really it. But 9/11 woke us up to all these other threats. And then I ended up in D.C. Again, I didn't really want to be there, but just chain of events. God put us up in Washington, D.C. for a few years, and I got assigned to work on anti-terrorism issues. So I was going out to the National Terrorism Center, basically inside of a secure environment almost every day, and getting exposed to all these other threats that people knew about in other parts of the government, but they'd never shared with the Border Patrol. No one ever thought it was important to let us know what was going on. And it really opened my eyes to not just like safety threats, not just like a criminal crossing the border, but threats to the existence of this country. Came back to San Diego, and then literally, this, if you remember back, this is probably about 2008, by the time I rotate out of that, get back to San Diego. We were just now building some new fencing here in San Diego, including going out into the ocean again, replacing some stuff. There was a bunch of protests going on. I was promoted by then to an assistant chief. And I'm looking at reports on a Monday morning, and I see that my guys had detained but chose to not arrest a whole bunch of students from Point Loma Nazarene University.
Oh, boy.
So I started looking into it, and the reason they chose to not arrest them, they had breached a secure zone, basically clashed with some Border Patrol agents. But once they interviewed them and talked to them, a professor had offered them extra credit to come to this event down at the border and didn't really tell them what they were getting into. They didn't understand the politics that were involved. And that is when I started realizing that there's this emerging clash between the social justice movement, even within my own church, and law and order and the things that I believe in. And then, again, trying to condense this quickly, that just grew. And next thing I knew, I actually went to some of my leadership at the time and actually asked for permission to kind of mix church and state a little bit. I'm like, I think it's very important for these students to understand that I'm a Border Patrol agent, but I have their same belief system, and I think their professor's wrong. So believe it or not, I got permission to be in full uniform. I went and met with this professor, remain nameless for now. Didn't happen overnight, but we worked out a deal. I asked to be in the classroom and just present. We never kind of got to that point, but they do call it a field trip, if you will, down to Tijuana. down to the border. I got them to agree to let me present.
Nice.
So the whole time I was here for years, it was either me or another volunteer. We never made anybody do it. Christian, who was a Border Patrol agent. There's been a few that have rotated through Skyline over the years. We would go meet with them on a Saturday, and I would stand side by side with this college professor in full uniform and explain to them that I have your same Christian beliefs. This is how I grew up. I think your professor's wrong. This is why. I would highlight the fact that and I believe this, the very first deportation ever in the history was recorded in Genesis, and so was the first Border Patrol when they violated the law and they got deported out of the Garden of Eden, and then the guards were, the security was set up.
Yep.
Like, man didn't create these ideas. I don't know if we made a difference or not, but that was the catalyst of basically my faith and my career, if you will. I call it colliding. And then I've kind of just been on a speaking tour. I wouldn't call it a tour, actually. I don't even know what to call it. Trying to educate people ever since then.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing how many people just don't understand really what's going on the border specifically and the threats to even be able to have a free country and be able to practice religion. I've rambled quite a while. I don't know if you have any
No,
other
that's
questions.
good. I think it's a big point of emphasis, especially there's a lot of liberal churches that consider themselves progressive, and they say, the Bible says that we have to allow the alien into the country, and it's like, yeah, but we always have to remember, God gave us a brain, and we need to use our brain, and that means if we're just going to have open borders, that means that every criminal that's across in another country, every drug dealer, then they can just come in. It's like we have, like you said earlier, Genesis is very clear. We have specific ways to secure our border, and we have ways where people can legally enter this country. And that's the thing that it seems like this current administration forgets, that a lot of Christians forget. Oh, that's not right. If we're holding, what are you talking about? You have to protect your country and protect your people. And if someone wants to get into our country, there are many ways they can do it legally. And that's what seems to be missing in the whole argument, especially what Biden's doing and just letting these people in left and right.
Correct. And if you look, so I've gotten into this debate. To be honest, transparent is probably a better word. I'm always honest. When I first started clashing with some of the people in the church, and I had the same college professor gives me this book to read, and I read it only because I promised him I would, and it was about Christians at the border. But I summarized the whole thing. That basically says if you support any nation, borders, or anything else, you're going straight to hell. You're a sinner. It was hard to get through that book. I went to some pastors that I actually trusted, and I had some good conversations with them about, hey, what is yours? How do you see this? But I think if you step back, it's just common sense. God created nations. We didn't. Yeah. It goes all the way back throughout the entire Bible. There are 12 tribes of Israel. The Tower of Babel, the whole concept was not having a centralized government, if you will, or a centralized thought process, breaking people up, changing their languages. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think it's supposed to be that way so that we can protect our right to actually have free religion. But then there's other I wouldn't say more practical, but there's other very, very practical non-religious issues, I think. Let's just say you want to help everybody, or you really do support the asylum laws in the United States, which I do, by the way. I'll get into that in a minute. By allowing this massive amount of fraud that's going on, you're actually hurting people that need help because they can't get to the front of the line. Okay. And then now you have fringes, right, on both sides of this political spectrum. And then by having this mass chaos on the border, a lot of people that I've talked to that used to be a little bit, I would say, more neutral have actually bought into the progressives' terminology that immigration is immigration. They won't differentiate between legal and illegal. And then now it's created this backlash against all immigrants and against all asylum seekers, and that's not the intent either. When I joined the Border Patrol, just a little history, it was under the Immigration and Naturalization Service, under the Department of Justice. It's under Homeland Security now. That happened after 9/11. But we were taught from day one that one of the most important things we were doing was preserving the United States' legal immigration processes by weeding out the fraud. But that's one of the things that really fired me up when I started looking into what a lot of the churches, I wouldn't say the churches, a lot of people associated with churches or subgroups of churches were doing at the border. They were helping people commit fraud. Yeah. So if you just want to help somebody, I get it, but they were literally teaching people how to give specific answers that were not true to the very first credible fear questions so that they would get released into the United States. I'm like, you're telling them to lie. How can that align with your Christian beliefs in any way, shape, or form? And they would refuse, obviously, to answer that question and change the subject.
Of course.
But the chaos that we've created through that today is not helping anybody.
And I think people see, these two sides of this, and they think that those who believe in a right process for immigration are just being cruel or racist or bigots or whatever, right? They start throwing the names out there. And yet you just said a moment ago, you agree with you. There's asylum laws. There's ways that people truly are coming from a bad situation. They can get into this country under asylum. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So the basic foundation of that, though, is immigration law. So I like to remind people, whether it's functioning properly today or not, you elect people that actually pass laws. So if you don't like the current immigration laws, all we have to do is elect people that will pass the laws that you want. The problem is Congress is just a reflection of society, and society is extremely divided currently. But the way the law sets now, we have avenues to help people under certain circumstances. It is not economics, though. It's literally religious persecution or individual groups being persecuted, that your life is in danger, you're threatened by a government entity, not a neighbor, not a local gang, not something where you could move across town and get away from it. That's the problem. A lot of people want all those things I just said to be part of the asylum process. They are not. The problem currently with the process, and we fix this, I'm not going to try to play politics, but we, government officials, made recommendations in the last administration that were listened to by the administration, and we really kind of fixed this. The problem is what we call catch and release. So you're never going to be able to weed out at the very, very, very beginning who wants to make an asylum claim. You really don't want to. You want anybody that really feels like they have some type of claim to be heard. But you don't want to give them the prize until their case has been actually reviewed and adjudicated. I use the example sometimes to make more sense to people that don't understand immigration. Think of it as a credit application. So if you could write anything you wanted on a credit application, and then you knew if you just answered these questions right, no one was going to check on them at all. You were going to be given the check right then and there. And then they told you, hey, once we review your credit application, if we decide that you shouldn't have got the money, you're going to have to pay it back. You're just going to have to immediately give it back in, 4 or 5 years. How do you think that would work out? But yet that's what we're doing at the border today under the Biden administration. People come up, they answer a few questions. The cartels, unfortunately, a bunch of NGOs, to include several quote-unquote religious non-governmental organizations, teach the aliens what to say so that then they get set up for a asylum hearing in front of a judge. That backlog is several years. So they get released into the United States while they wait for that hearing. Whether they're ever seen or not is irrelevant. You'll hear a lot of people arguing about that. But if you fast forward to the very, very end of the process, I think it's less than 11% they actually meet the merits, like get granted asylum, but less than 1% are actually ever deported or ever leave the country. Because even in the final hearing, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they're banned from being in the court. So even if the aliens are ordered to leave the country, they just walk out of that courthouse at that minute free, and they're supposed to just self-surrender later, pack up and leave.
Wow.
That doesn't happen. So the whole thing goes, if you back the whole thing all the way up in the last administration, we're like, all we need to do is follow the law. The law says until their case is adjudicated, they're supposed to be detained or remain outside the country. The minute we did that, we called it the Migrant Protection Protocols, more commonly referred to remain in Mexico. People could come up, they made a claim. We worked with Mexico to make sure that they could stay south of the border until their hearing, and we actually really sped up the hearings. We brought judges down to the border to do everything a lot quicker. But the day they had a hearing, we would meet them at the port of entry, escort them to the courthouse, and then if they were allowed to stay, they're allowed to stay. And if they're not, we would escort them back to the border. 80% of the cases just went away because they were fraud and they knew they were fraud. That allowed real asylum seekers, people that literally were fearing for their life for whatever reason, to actually get help a lot quicker. This administration shut that whole program down on day one.
Now, why? Why are they, in your opinion, you've been there, front lines, why do they want this wide open border and let all of these folks come in. I mean, they're talking about they're going to give them driver's license. They already give them scholarships ahead
Talking about letting them vote.
letting them vote. And I mean, I think that's the big thing. Let's let them all in. They're going to vote in favor of the Democrats or whoever's in power, right? Who's letting them do this? They're going to vote in favor of it. So, I mean, what else would it be?
So it runs the whole gamut, because I've had the conversations here. I spent a lot of my career in California. I would say this was a petri dish for what's going on at the national level now. I actually briefed your current governor a couple of times, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What a waste of time that
Yeah,
was.
that bad.
Yeah, sorry. But it runs the whole gamut. I've met several people and had great conversations with them that really, truly, down to the marrow of their bones, believe that you should not tell anybody they can't come into the country, that it's a sin, that it's wrong, and that is their legit, no conspiracy, moral feelings or obligations that they put on themselves. They believe it. I honestly believe that's a small group, but I've met them, I've talked to them, I know they exist. And they're unbelievably naive. They just believe in this utopian mindset that we're all going to get along and there's no real threats out there.
It's all good people coming.
But I could never get a single one of those people, by the way, to admit to me that they don't lock their own doors and windows and control who comes into their home. But that's another discussion for later. The more I was in D.C., the more callous I would get a little bit, I think. I don't know that it's about the votes, because you can't really control what somebody's going to do when they go to the ballot box. And by law, they could never say they're going to vote anyway, but by law, illegal aliens can't vote. But here's the catch. Under the Trump administration tried to change the U.S. Census, so it only counted U.S. citizens, not just warm bodies that happen to be in the area. Why is that important? Because that's how congressional seats are determined. So we'll use California for an example. If California literally only started counting U.S. citizens, I have no doubt whatsoever that this state would lose considerable congressional seats. That's just as, if not more important than the vote at the end of the day. So I think that's part of it.
Well, and with the exit, the Californians that have exited and continue to exit, I think we've already lost 2 seats.
Yeah, sorry, I left.
Yeah, you left. Don't blame you. But yeah, I mean, it's clear that it seems like to so many of us that watch this stuff and follow this stuff that it's almost purposeful. You kind of go, why are you purposely ruining our state? It just looks like they're
I'll tell you that
it.
from my perspective. The why I can't answer, because you're trying to get into somebody else's head to a certain extent, but it's purposeful. The why piece I'm not going to get into too much. I just did a little bit based on conversations I had. But is it intentional or not? It's very intentional. I had conversations with Governor Newsom over the years when he was a lieutenant governor, when he was actual governor. I won't get into all that, but very, very dishonest, had factual information, showed it. He admitted, yep, that's it. And then basically he went and did like a video on Twitter 20 minutes later, or less, actually about 10 minutes later, that countered all of that. Wow. In D.C., the same thing. People ask me the biggest difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, because I worked under both of them. Under the Trump administration, my orders, my talking points, if you will, that I was given were, go tell America what's going on, period. And then they said, hey, by the way, let us know what's going on so we can tell them too. But no one ever told me, no one gave me a script, no one ever told me to spin what I was doing. If you were here, and you were, but when we did the border wall prototype, I actually gave the president the tour down here and explained to him what did and didn't work. And it was very interesting dialogue. I would call it more like an argument, if you would, at a certain point in time. But basically, he really, truly wanted to know. Day one, when the Biden administration got elected, and it was like this under the Obama administration as well, they basically shut down all communication coming out of CBP and Border Patrol. You can ask any reporter, any journalist out there, you can't get any information basically out of CBP. The only real good information that's still coming out is the last commissioner when I was chief. The two of us believed in transparency. So we basically really pushed hard within Customs and Border Protection. And anybody that wants to can go on there and look. cbp.gov, there's an area on there, it's called Stats and Summaries, where we just started publishing statistics, just data. So there's no spin, just factual information. You can go on there and dig it up yourself. This administration hates that, but it's already out there. But they've really shut down communication. They wanted me to say the border was secure, but then it wasn't secure. So look at the perspectives. So even if you weren't a conspiracy theorist, when you see one side of the argument that's like, hey, pull the layers back, look at everything, ask any questions, let's just be transparent, tell America what's going on, make your own choice. And the other one wants to silence everybody. That and right there should wake people up.
Now, tell us about your journey a little bit, because you saw so much, and then you're going through the ranks, and you're getting promoted. I mean, you end up in charge. You're chief. I mean, you're over the entire Border Patrol, and like you mentioned, you're under Trump. There's one way of operating. You're under Biden, and there's a whole different way. And they kind of wanted you out of there.
Yeah,
you're a little
I don't
too
think that's a
transparent or
secret.
something. Yeah, they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't like this whole transparency thing.
Not at all. And part of it, too, and again, for anybody listening that doesn't understand how this works, you just hit the nail on the head. I came up through the ranks. I was not a political appointee, never was. I had the same perspective, same recommendations, whether I was talking to somebody in the Democrat or somebody on the Republican side. And in California, most of my career was talking to people on the Democratic side. I heard through the grapevine that just because there was a bunch of pictures out with me standing beside President Trump when we briefed on the prototypes, and because when asked, I answered questions honestly, the one that they hate the most is, does a wall work? I'm like, yeah, wall works great. Let me explain to you why. And I would use the San Diego example, that when we were testing this way before Trump ever came along, we started testing this kind of stuff back in the 90s and trying to figure out what is the right mix so we can give America basically the most cost-effective border security possible. The border wall was a one-time investment, 25 to 30 years, and this was the old one, that it would last. And in a 12-mile section, the first 12 miles where we put it in from the beach just out past Otay, it freed up over 150 agents every 24 hours. It was a $28 million return on the investment every single year in salaries and benefits alone for the life of that wall system. They didn't like that. They're like, he supports the wall. I'm like, well, I'm just telling you what works.
Yeah.
So I had heard through the grapevine there was already a target on my head. By federal regulations, when a new administration comes in, they can't mess with any career government officials, even in leadership positions, for 120 days. So I just knew that clock was ticking. But to be honest, I was probably more naive politically than I had been in a long time, because here in California, when I could get even some of the farthest left-wing open border people by themselves on the border, walk with them, show them, explain to them what we do, get out of the rhetoric. Like, this has nothing to do with race. This is not bigotry. This is literally the United States. And I don't care if the most white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy from Canada or Europe comes across the border, I'm arresting him too. They would get it. And several of them came around, and they never became openly like advocating, but they didn't fight against us either. So I kind of thought I would have the same results in D.C. They didn't show up to work. That was the biggest problem. So they used COVID as an example, but some of the leadership that came into CBP, the disdain was very, very obvious, not just for me personally. I was told to my face by one of the political appointees, very high up, that they did not trust the United States Border Patrol, and they certainly didn't trust me.
Wow.
And they're like, well, I'll prove to you you can. I go, you may not like what I say, but I'll be honest and open with you. I thought we would win them over. And I underestimated that. And I underestimated, and this is going to sound a little weird to some people, not everybody, but I think I underestimated that this really has gotten to the point. This is a spiritual war now. Yeah. This isn't about Republicans and Democrats, and I was still dealing with it from that perspective. And I hadn't realized just until I talked to a couple of pastors up in D.C., like how deep the spiritual warfare is right now. And the best way to really, destroy Christianity is to destroy kind of the hub of it, the United States, and take away our ability to act on and live out our values.
Yeah, because those values are complete opposite of this administration currently, the way the world is going. And that's a great plug for my End Time series coming up October 1st. Perfect segue into that. But it's true. It's a spiritual battle. It's spiritual warfare. At the end of the day, we're seeing good versus evil all over the place. And it's really just becoming clearer, right? I mean, through COVID, that was a big, obvious thing that was going on. It was so clear that when you're saying things like strip clubs could be open, but the church cannot, that was pretty evident of what was going on, but we're going to call it, well, because of safety and protocols, church can't be open. And so we saw all that, and that was something. How did you guys deal with all that, and how did all that just come about with you and the border and everything? That must have been a mess.
It was a mess, to be quite honest. So I obviously wasn't in all the meetings with CDC, but the border and what we did at the border was a big part of the conversations. So the director of CDC was in meetings at CBP. I was getting briefed on what we believed the threats were at the time and what the science was. And I didn't see any conspiracies. This is actually an important point. Yeah. I still believe everything that I was being briefed on was the best information they had available at the time. Mm-hmm. Looking back now, you see that there was filters on top of it and all kinds of other stuff. But the fact that COVID was real, that people were dying from it. I went to 15 funerals and gave spouses or surviving families American flags because the guys got COVID or gals got COVID at work, and it was traced directly back. Mm-hmm. However, we never ever once, even talking through the vaccines and speeding that up and everything, never talked about any kind of a mandate, and it was always about just protecting America, getting things back open as quickly as possible. I'll give you an example of the conspiracy stuff, though. It's just kind of crazy. Don't forget, the government isn't, I don't care who the president is, there's still human beings in the government, right? So there's far left, far right. Well, the State Department specifically, and a lot of people at Health and Human Services, they don't really understand border security. They didn't grasp what was going on. So they're literally, when we went to implement Title 42, where they started talking about leveraging this authority that's been there forever to just slow down the flow of COVID coming into the country. We'll deal with what's here, but we don't need it bring it anymore. Oh, you're trying to leverage this crisis for immigration, you right-wing conspiracy theorists, everything else. So basically how that got resolved, I was like, I don't know how to convince you except have you go. So basically, we took a small team from Health and Human Services and sent them to some Border Patrol facilities in South Texas. I think they might have actually even come to San Diego to see how small those stations are, the conditions that the illegal aliens are in before they come here and after they come over here, the types of conveyances they come over that they're not wearing masks, there's not exactly a hygienic situation or whatever. And that team came back and said, oh, we need to implement Title 42 as soon as possible. This is this is the worst condition for Petri dish as far as like COVID exists. But then fast forward again, some of the same people, because government employees stay, that were fighting against, of course, Title 42 at first, but then agreed and admitted that we needed it. All of a sudden they backtrack when a new administration comes in. Just the hypocrisy was a challenge. But I had to put agents out every single day facing that. So we had to find ways to process people quicker, to keep them out of our stations. And I think we actually did a really, really good job. But where it got really hard for us is when basically you had a bunch of people screaming, to open the border. And even my kids here in San Diego couldn't go to school. Yeah. Churches were still closed everywhere, but yet the same people were saying, oh, you need to open the border and let all these people in. The hypocrisy was just in your face, like I'd never seen it before. And again, that's when I wouldn't say started realizing, but you could no longer tell yourself there wasn't some underlying, power, conspiracy theory, whatever else. And I don't really buy into the conspiracy theories as much as I do the spiritual warfare.
Yeah, right. And it just seems like so often in whether it's Washington, D.C., the political environment, they say one thing, do another, and it's just normal. They call evil good, good evil, and we're supposed to just go along with it, and nobody asks questions, and it's just so frustrating, especially here in California and what we're dealing with from our governor and from things that come down from there. You just go, man, this is definitely spiritual warfare. This is definitely that kind of battle, and so we're certainly fighting that. So you're at the top of the heap in the Border Patrol. You start sensing this tension. You're going to be, on your way out in 120 days or whatever. How did that all go down?
Well, pretty publicly, actually. Yeah. So there was a little bit of the strife internally, but again, I'm trying to win these people over. I'm trying to talk to them. I'll give you an example, though, of what we were dealing with. We had a new chief of staff that came in within 5 minutes of Biden being inaugurated, introduced herself, told us, by the way, the chief of staff is like the most senior political person in the organization until a congressionally confirmed, and in our case, commissioner comes in. Mm-hmm. So basically she comes in and she tells us flat out, hey, I'm here to make sure you follow the administration, what we want to do, everything else. We're all used to that. But then she immediately follows it up with, however, I'm going to work virtually most of the time. I made an agreement, this is flat out, I made an agreement with the administration that I could work virtually because I think it's so important that my kids go to school face-to-face. We moved 2 hours south of DC to get them into a private school, and part of the agreement with the private school is that if I travel outside the area or outside the small circle of people that I interact with, that I'll pull my kids out of school for 14 days and we'll isolate. And I don't really want to do that. So I can't go to the border. I'm not going to come to work. I'm going to try to get to know you through a video screen.
Wow.
And by the way, this is the same administration that's shutting everything down, but they moved 2 hours to make sure their kids could go to school face-to-face. That was what we were dealing with the whole time. So trying to navigate and talk nicely and politely and educate people on the border threats. Anytime we started to bring up anything about actual threats, and there are real ones, back then we were seeing a very, very small increase in people on the National Terrorist Watch List pop up in between the ports of entry. We interact with them at the ports of entry at airports quite a bit, but in between the ports, that was pretty rare. I ended up writing a letter to Congress right after I retired because we had hit 12, and that was a record high.
Wow.
Record high. We're at 140 now this year. 140. We weren't allowed to talk about anything like that at all. We weren't allowed to talk about the criminal aliens that were being arrested. We weren't allowed to talk about drug smuggling. So trying to have those conversations was frustrating. One of the things everybody needs to remember, I think you've talked about this a few times in different messages, but words matter. So this is one of the biggest places we clashed pretty quickly, very publicly. This memo got leaked out and everything. They wanted to change terminology. So illegal alien, for example, people get all fired up about that, but that is literally just a legal term. It's in federal law. Our agents have to write those actual words in court documents, charging documents to charge people with a crime. It's part of it. They don't like it, so they wanted to create these new terms. They don't like calling people illegal aliens. Right. Well, they asked my opinion. This is where I draw the line too. They actually asked my opinion. They gave me a memo. We're gonna change this terminology. We're gonna use all this. We're gonna forbid agents from using these terms. What do you think? This is an email, by the way. So I told them what I thought, and I'm like, you're politicizing law enforcement. No, this is a horrible idea. Obviously, you have the right to do this. You can do whatever you want. I think it's a bad idea. But you have that authority. Just don't ask me to agree. There's this other formal process within Customs and Border Protection. We call it a blue sheet. But basically, it goes to the leadership, and then you only have two choices. You have to concur with whatever the recommendation is, or you non-concur, and then you have to submit and explain why. So I'm like, just don't go through that process. Do whatever you want. You're fine. You don't have to use that process. So about 3 weeks went by. Well, they used that process. So I had to non-concur. So that leaked out. That became a big deal. It was blown out of proportion. But that was when I really knew it's coming. I was given talking points. People will remember that Secretary Mayorkas, right after he became secretary, he did a big Sunday talk show. I'm looking at reports of about 4,000 gotaways, documented, seen on camera gotaways over the weekend. Unaccompanied alien children, the numbers are going through the roof. All of a sudden, we're seeing all kinds of increased narcotic smuggling. Anyway, he goes on the Sunday talk shows and tells everybody, borders closed, borders secure, everything's good, nothing to see here. And then they gave me those talking points to use. And I'm like, yeah, not going to happen. Nor am I going to allow any of my personnel to say that whatsoever.
Right.
They're like, quote unquote, from a political appointee, well, we thought you would like hearing that. And I'm like, well, I would love it if it was true, but it's not true. You can't go tell America things just because that's how you want them to be. You need to be honest. How can people vote properly if they don't even have the facts? And we'll come back to that because that's the reason I actually speak out more now than any other reason. But it was polite clash after polite clash after polite clash. There was no like blow up, screaming and yelling at each other, none of that. More and more, they just avoided me. I would get edicts, if you will, or written guidance from the secretary without ever being involved in meetings.
Like telling you what to say, telling you
what to do.
Yeah,
here's a new policy.
Yeah.
For example, one of them he was in some negotiations with ACLU, and he agreed to a whole bunch of stuff we were going to have to do. Basically letting groups of aliens into the United States we would never normally let in, and we were ordered to process them. And I had sent out here's another one we'll clash. I had sent out guidance to my personnel that I believe the job of the Border Patrol is to protect America. I believe that's why they're funded. I believe there's a ton of history behind it. Immigration authority is one of the authorities that Border Patrol has. They're not just immigration cops, so they arrest anybody across the border. So we use that, but why do you arrest people? To protect America based on the laws Congress put in place. We never have enough agents to do everything. So you'll hear about DHS talking about prioritizing enforcement actions and everything else. I do believe in that to a certain extent. So I told our agents, we know for a fact the cartel uses illegal aliens, especially those that are willing to surrender, to claim asylum, to overwhelm law enforcement at the border, create systematic gaps in border security that they can control so that they can bring the second wave of whatever it is, whether it be the criminals that are willing to pay more, that don't want their fingers on a scanner, or the narcotics or whatever else. We know that's happening. We've watched it, and they're getting better and better at it. So when you see a group cross the border and they're just standing there, and you don't perceive any type of a threat, but we know this other activity is going on, I expect you to prioritize your response based on what you perceive as the biggest threat to America at that time. That did not go over well at all. So the guidance that the Border Patrol has today, not from Border Patrol leadership, they're career government officials, but from the senior leadership of DHS and the White House, is we don't want anybody seen standing on the border or backing up at Border Patrol stations. So their guidance is to, as fast as possible, pick anybody up that they see along the border, get them into an air-conditioned environment where you don't have the visual of people standing between the fences here in San Diego or in Arizona. You don't have the visual of them standing out in a hot desert area. Get them in, get them processed, but keep what we call tick time, time in custody. Keep time in custody to an absolute minimum. So process them and get them out. Either give them to ICE, give them to a non-governmental organization, or do what we call street releases. There's nowhere in their guidance that talks about protecting America, focusing on the threats to this country, slowing down the fentanyl pouring across the border.
Yeah.
None of that. That clash basically carried me right to the end, because I wasn't willing to back off of our position.
I mean, you have the values, and obviously your faith played into that, because you're not willing, like so many other people, they're going to protect their job, right? If they don't have the foundation of the morality, the faith, and it's like, why not? Well, they're telling me what to do. I'm just going to do it. I'm just doing my job. And yet you stood firm. So I imagine your faith played into it in that sense.
My faith played into it huge, and just for everybody watching this, I think you've preached on this a little bit, and we'll come to the grudges you talked about yesterday, because I'm struggling with that a little bit.
Yeah.
It did come into play, but it's not always, like, your plan isn't always God's plan. Yeah. So I couldn't tell you, man. I prayed harder than I've ever prayed before. By the way, I didn't want to be chief of the Border Patrol. So when I was asked to be chief, that was a whole nother set of prayers altogether, talking to the family. I was happy here in San Diego at the time. I was the sector chief, a lot of freedom. There was nothing in it for me to become the chief. So I believe that God told me to go do it, so I went and did it. And I don't have any regrets. But it was similar. I was like, you got this, God. I'm just going to pray through. I know these people. But in my mind, I know these people will come around. They'll realize I'm not the enemy, that I'm literally just telling them the truth about what's going on. They still make the decisions. I never violated any orders. I never gave them any reason. So they couldn't fire me. They just reassigned me. I was like, nope, it'll all work out, just like it did in California. I'll win them over. So that didn't happen, obviously. But I still believed that, and I still struggle with this sometimes, not like deep struggle, but every now I'm like, seriously? Like, what am I supposed to be doing now? Yeah. Type of a deal. But I know it was all part of God's plan. I believe that to the core. I have an awesome, supportive family, not just the wife, but both daughters. The younger daughter, thank God for Skyline's youth group. She was not struggling Christianity-wise, but basically our youth group before wasn't helping her grow. When we came here, she just took off. She loved it. So I had their full support. That's awesome. But at the end of the day, and I would even say back to the little Indiana farm kid, I learned very early in life that everybody makes mistakes. But at least in my family, if I admitted I made a mistake and I was just open and honest, there was still punishment, but it was different. So that carried me all the way through. And I was looking at everything that I was saying and doing. I was looking at the law, and I'm like, I believe that God has me here for a reason, that I'm doing everything I possibly can. And I just unfortunately read some of the scriptures in the Bible that talk about being persecuted, called out, villainized. But But then I think it's James 1:5 talks about, even if you're a complete, so I'm gonna like paraphrase, but even if you're a total screw up, if you ask for wisdom, he'll give it to you.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just prayed for wisdom to make the proper decisions all the time, and then trust God to work it out. So, and he really has. So I'm not the chief of the Border Patrol anymore, but I'm not homeless either.
Yeah.
I chose to work with some nonprofits where I could continue to speak out and advocate. I've been called to Congress several times now to help with legislation, but also to testify before Congress about the situation, what's going on, how to fix it a couple of times. I don't think I would have had, well, I wouldn't have. If I was still in the administration, they control your voice. They control who goes to Congress. They control everything you say. If you violate it, it literally is a violation of policy, so they could fire you.
Wow.
They can't make you lie. They can just make you be silent. Anyway, I believe that this is what it is. And once it clicked, this is a spiritual warfare now. And my dad's big into, not preaching, but he teaches Sunday school, teaches on the end of times. We have these conversations all the time, too. And not to get into that, steal from your message. But I think if we're not there, we're pretty close.
We're getting there. Yeah.
Yeah.
No question.
And I want to be in the fight.
I think that's something people that don't have faith don't realize. Like, you're 29 years and you're in charge, and it would be so easy for you to fall apart, right? I mean, I worked all my life. Here I am. And they're forcing me out, basically, right? You could just fall apart. I mean, people do all the time, right? But you have faith, and you're able to see there's a greater purpose here.
Correct. And I think some people exaggerate that sometimes. That doesn't mean you don't have those moments.
Yeah.
But in totality, you step back. Because I think it's human nature to look around and just go, seriously? How could anything good come out of this? I've got several years left. I had all these great plans. I wasn't the most unpopular chief within the Border Patrol ever. I'm like, I got this support. How could it be God's plan? First, by the way, let me back up. My family ended up staying in San Diego. So there was times I'm looking basically up and or in the mirror going, seriously, you separated me from my family for almost 2 years, and then now this is the result? Anyway, so I think that's all normal, but if you have the foundation and you believe that God has a better plan, there's that. It doesn't even mean you leave smiling and happy, oh, God's got a plan. But you're like, okay, I may not get it today, but I know at some point I will. I know at some point the curtain will be pulled back and I will understand what your intent was.
And that's where faith really comes in, right? That's where the rubber meets the road of faith in those trying times. When everything is good and going our way, the winds at our back, it's easy for us to go, I love the Lord. I can sit on Sunday and worship, man. It's so great. Yeah. But it's those times of testing when we don't understand what is happening. You mapped it out. You had it figured out in your mind. You knew what was and yet God said, nope, it's going to be like this. And you're able to see that as, okay, I don't have to like that, but at the same time, there's a greater plan behind it, and that's helped guide you. I mean, throughout your whole career, obviously, that has been a foundation that has guided you, directed you, and now on to new adventures. You mentioned a little bit about what you're doing, but share a little bit more about specifically what you're doing now.
So I'll put this into context too. So again, not playing politics, but it became very public when they gave me we call it a 3R letter, because there's three choices. You get a letter.
3-hour letter?
3R.
Oh, 3R.
As in Romeo, or relocate. So you get a letter basically when you're in senior positions, and it says, hey, we have chosen to transfer you to this new location, this new assignment. And then please check one of the 3 boxes below. And 1 box is relocate, 1 box is resign, and 1 box is retire. So basically, we call it the 3R.
That's what it said. That's what the letter is?
Yeah, that's why we call it a 3R letter, basically.
So you got that letter.
So I got that letter, and
what was your emotion? What was your thought right there? You get this letter. Were you
I'd
surprised?
been told. I'd had a couple conversations. I was told it was coming. I was asked to stay. Okay, I'll give you the whole story. I was asked to keep that quiet and not tell anybody. And I told him no. I go, here's the deal. Normally, I wouldn't really even care. However, there was all these rumors even in the Border Patrol and my leadership all the way down to the agents out in the field of what's going on. Is the Biden administration going to fire the chief? Is he staying? Is he not? So I had promised everybody for that whole 120 days, when I know, you'll know. Don't worry about it until then. I need you to focus on the mission, focus on your job, stay safe, keep your troops safe. don't worry about who the chief's going to be. It's not completely irrelevant, but like it's almost irrelevant to you in the field, right? But I made a promise that as soon as I knew, I would tell him. So I told the secretary that. I'm like, no, I can't keep it to myself. I go, the minute I get that letter, I promised my team I would tell them. So when I told them, it leaked, which I probably should have. I really didn't care anyway. So it became national news. Anyway, you go through that whole process, but I don't even.
Were you contacted by media outlets? Are you allowed to talk at
now
that
I know where we're
point?
going. Not yet, because you're still employed. So I was contacted not only by every media outlet under the sun, but I was also contacted by pretty much every congressman and senator that started with an R. And they wanted me to basically just resign right then. This was one of the proposals. Resign right then, walk down to the Capitol and do this big press conference on the steps of the Capitol and then just blow the lid on everything that the Biden administration was doing. So I didn't say no, but I told them if they could get at least 2 Democrats to stand there with them, that I would do it. But because part of the reason I was being run out is they thought I was like acting on behalf of the Republican Party or something. Yeah. Obviously, they couldn't get 2. So anyway, fast forward, I told them no. But then a group of people from the last administration contacted me. And they're like, hey, we heard what's going on. You need to know that there are some real long-term repercussions of your next decisions. And you need to probably make it. They're good Christian people. They're like, you need to talk to your wife about this and make sure you know what's going on. I kind of knew this, but I hadn't really thought it through. A lot of people that leave in those very high positions, and the Border Patrol chief is considered, it's a 4-star position. It's a very high position, right? Get great cushy jobs with like Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, any of these huge
like consultant jobs.
Yes,
kind of thing? Yeah.
Because of your network.
Yep.
But you make a ton of money. But they don't want anybody that's controversial. So if you speak out in any way, because they want to be able to sell things to the government for years to come, whether it's Republican or Democrat. So if you speak out in any way, a lot of those jobs are immediately gone off the table. So they're like, we know you, but if you speak out, and you basically like tell everybody what's going on, just know that you're going to lose a lot of income earning potential. And you need to make sure you talk to your wife about that. However, if you want to stay in the game and you want to keep fighting, there's mechanisms for that as well, but it's mostly nonprofits. You'll be putting food on the table. You can probably still help your kids with college a little bit, but you're not giving them like a 4-year ride with, you know what I mean? So I was like, I had good conversations, very grateful for that information, went home, talked to the wife. And it came back to 2 things. One, most importantly, faith, just right or wrong, black and white. And then 2, the joke became, I was a cop on the border for almost 30 years. If I wanted to be a millionaire, I could have smuggled so much drugs and illegal aliens or whatever else to make bank. But that violates my faith and my core values, and I'm not going to do it. The reason I was getting fired is because I had core values. I surely wasn't going to violate them now. So basically, long story short, I was like, hey, talk to me about this NGO thing. Like, how can I stay involved? So you've probably heard of Heritage Foundation. There's other organizations like that. Well, we already had a couple of people placed at Heritage with border security expertise. There's another similar one in Texas called Texas Public Policy Foundation. They don't advertise they're a Christian organization, but I went and met with them, had good conversations, very, very much a Christian-based organization. And they offered to bring me on as a consultant. What that does is it puts some food on the table, but really it gives me access to congressmen and senators, and it gives me a platform to speak from. And that's primarily what I do now. I'm also helping the state of Texas with border security because the federal government walked away from it, and the governor there, whether you like him or not, is doing everything he possibly can to not just protect Texans, but protect the whole country. And poor Texans are paying for it twice. You already paid your federal taxes, and now the state's doing it again. But I signed on with them, and it's worked out pretty good. And basically, I help any congressman or senator that wants information about the border. We do border trips every quarter to take people down, show them what's really going on to the extent we can, because CBP's basically locked down all access. They really don't allow the public or reporters or anybody into their facilities anymore. But that was a godsend as well. I never heard of them, ever. And then that's exposed me to some other nonprofit organizations. I've had opportunities to speak to, several hundred people in Atlanta, another huge group in Miami, organizations and people from parts of the country that didn't understand border security, didn't understand the real threat to their way of life and their beliefs. Looking back now, I'm like, well, if I was still chief, I would have never got the ability to do that either. So
Yeah, now you're educating a lot of people about the reality of it. Where do you see this headed? Where do you see this administration, border security? I mean, you can see a trajectory here if you and it's like, what is it going to take? First of all, where do you see it headed? And then what is it going to take for, a mindset change in Washington, D.C. to say this is really important for our country?
So the only way D.C. changes, though, is if we change. So I do a lot of speaking, and I'll come back to that, but I think because the trajectory is really up to us. It's kind of weird sometimes, and I don't know how to talk about it in such a short time frame. But a lot of Christians will say, hey, the Bible says you're supposed to do what your leaders say, that all leaders are put in place by God. And I believe that to a certain extent. But that context, it was pointed out to me by some religious leaders, was when you had like a dictator or somebody won by war. Our leaders are put in place by us.
Right.
It is your civic responsibility to know what's going on and devote your core values and devote your beliefs. I don't think a lot of that happens nowadays. So part of it,
which was the same thing during COVID, right? We heard the arguments from other churches. We were open there. Why are you open? Don't you know Romans 13? Obey your government. It's like, no, that's the wrong context.
Wrong context, correct. Yeah, to a point, right? Walk off the cliff. Yeah, I'm not going to be doing that.
Exactly.
So the trajectory, I don't want to predict. I hope. By the way, let me back up. This administration is not changing anything.
Right.
If you have any doubt of that, watch the congressional hearings where they brought in Mayorkas face to face. The guy just smirks and lies directly to Congress, or just filibusters when they ask him a question. He doesn't ever answer the question.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So one of the things that I'm really pushing Congress right now, and the reason this debate about border security and immigration continues, is there is no transparency. So I'm trying to get anybody, my pet peeve project is literally law that mandates transparency, even down to FEMA grants. Is the money being spent on U.S. citizens or being spent on foreign nationals? How many people are being released into the United States, but specifically get transparency into the conversation so that when you go into the ballot box, you can actually make an informed vote.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, it's really hard to do that right now. If people don't do that in 2024, I think we're done.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to even say that. It sounds really bad, but literally I'm watching. Border Patrol's had this is just the border. This isn't about everything going on, the chaos in the society and the culture going downhill and morals. Just the border itself. 1.7 million gotaways since just this last year. Where Border Patrol, by the way, people don't understand that. When Border Patrol reports gotaways, because by the way, they never did that before I was the chief, we tracked them, but even the chiefs before me, we had some internal debates, refused to put those out because it's a little bit of a soft number. But those are known. That means they were seen on camera, there was footprints, there was actual evidence of a crossing. It's not an estimate like a lot of people would believe. That doesn't account for the hundreds of miles of border that don't have a single Border Patrol agent or any technology on them whatsoever. So we don't know how many more. But we just ingested 1.7 million people that we know a couple things about. One, they didn't want to meet a Border Patrol agent because if they wanted to, they could have surrendered like some of the asylum seekers. So they were intentionally trying to avoid apprehension for some reason. And then two, they didn't stay at the border. It's a transit area. They're going somewhere else, so they're all over the country now. How much more of that? And by the way, and then the Biden administration released, they won't release the numbers, but one of the estimates is up to like 5 million people. But they're from 160 to 170 different nations. This isn't about Mexico. Yeah. And they try to make it sound like it's about Mexico. All these different religions, all these different cultures, none of which really align with us. A lot of the beliefs don't align with us, obviously. How do you sustain that? So immigration laws of any even a little village, the idea is that it grows as you assimilate people in so you can maintain your beliefs, your core values, your culture. But there's not a society on the planet that can ingest that many people with that many different cultures, that many different beliefs, and really truly survive as the entity that it was before. You'll either assimilate them or they'll assimilate you. And I think we're headed to the second piece if we're not careful. Your vote, people don't understand how important their vote is. And I really, again, not to get too far into the politics, but one of the things I really like about a lot of your messages is reminding people that it all matters. because I've gotten more into politics now in Oklahoma, but it's the school boards.
Yep.
Because that's where people forget, but that's where we really lost it. You know, you can't go to church on a Sunday, hear a message, and then the other 5 days out of the week be brainwashed with all this stuff, but yet we've allowed it.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to win back not just the corporate federal core government and border security, but we literally need Christians to pick their head up, read the Bible, and vote based on what that says and what they claim their core values are. And I honestly believe we would be okay.
Yeah.
The numbers are out there, but unfortunately a lot of people vote their emotions and not their core values.
And it's really liberals, and it's really people that say, you know, oh, the church should stay out of politics. You just do your thing at church. In other words, be really soft and just enjoy your little church or whatever, but don't get into public policy. Don't get into, and it's like, that's why we're in the situation
That's
we're
how
in
we got here
right now.
Yeah.
Is because the church has just been silent and thought, oh, I can't speak up on these things. I can't talk about it. And this whole baloney about the Johnson Amendment and, oh, you can't say anything. They're going to take away your tax exempt. No, we still have freedom of speech.
Correct.
And we still need to speak out on these issues, talk very clearly about what the issues are, equip our people, and like you said, the school boards, everything else. I mean, the stuff they're teaching. I mean, we started the academy last year, overflowing. That's awesome, and we're going to keep growing that thing because people are just exiting. When you see the stuff they're teaching in third grade, you go, I'm not wanting my kid around that.
But the only way you see it is to pay attention.
Right.
So if anything good came out of COVID, it was actually people paying attention.
It's true.
But unfortunately, a lot still aren't paying attention. It comes down to that vote. It's so critical.
Yeah, we've got to know the issues, vote for our values. The same thing we spend our money on, right? I mean, as much as we can. We want to spend our money on organizations, products that follow our values. And a lot of times people don't know, right, what this company believes. But there's so much of that's pushed that we need to educate ourselves more on knowing what does that company believe with that product they're putting out. I may like that product, but behind it is a whole nother agenda. I had to stop another magazine subscription. I love this magazine too. I had to stop it because every month it was a new political statement about completely opposite of my values. And I just had to say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And they actually reached out to me, hey, why are you canceling? Well, because every month now, you're pushing it. You're trying to brainwash me. I just want to learn about that subject. I don't want to know the politics, that you believe in so often. So,
So it kind of along the same lines, when I was still chief, and I still do it today, two things that I push. People would always be like, hey, what do you think the biggest threat to the country is? Fill in the blanks, right? Anybody, I don't think they expected what I told them. I'm like, the biggest threat right now is being able to tell fact from fiction. It's getting harder and harder and harder. And a lot of what you just said, if you just listen to mainstream media and you just take things on face value, it's a whole different issue without faith. So I tell people two things. One, get back into the Word of God because that is the baseline. And then when you're listening, dig in a little deeper because the Biden administration, currently, I'll just use Mayorkas, for example, when he goes to Congress or even publicly, most of, not all, because the border's not secure, but most of what he says, there's a little tidbit of fact. But he leaves out the rest of the story, which makes what he's saying it misrepresents the situation, but yet the fact is accurate. For example, recently they said they had some new policies that decreased cross-border illegal activity by 70%. That was true from day to day, but over the course of a month, it wasn't the case at all. It was a very, very minimal impact, and then now this last month, the numbers have gone back up. But you got to dig in a little bit deeper. But if you have a foundation in faith that there is an absolute right or wrong, period, and you know where to get that, and then you actually dig in and ask some more questions, I think we'll be okay. Yeah. But unfortunately, so many people now, they just take the news at face value. And I can tell you, I've been in many, many crime scenes, and very rarely is what was reported on the news accurate for what was at the crime scene. You got to dig in a little deeper, but you got to have a foundation.
Yeah, and that's something that you certainly have exhibited, and I think as Americans, we certainly appreciate your service to our country, and when you were here in San Diego protecting our borders. And I think as I look into the future, is there any pathway back, not with this administration, but if a new administration comes in, is there a pathway back where you can get more influential in that way?
Yes and no. So I was asked about the chief position, and I don't want to repeat the sins of the past, if you will. The Border Patrol chief is supposed to be a career position. You come up through the ranks. They just picked a new chief, actually, a guy named Jason Owens. He's a great guy, integrity beyond reproach.
Good.
I just hope that we can get him to survive
Yeah.
this administration. So I don't want that position, but I have told everybody, hey, I spent 29 years, not just me, several other people, a lot of other people, figuring out what worked and what didn't work and what was cost effective. And we actually made huge progress during the Trump administration. So I am more than willing to go back and help guide, direct, give advice, in a policy perspective. I have no desire, to be in like an official, congressionally confirmed position or anything like that. I don't know that I would say no, but I find that those positions get so busy and overwhelmed in the bureaucracy that they have a hard time getting anything done anyway.
Yeah.
So I've made it very clear, and I continue to talk to several of the presidential candidates and their staff about what worked and what didn't work. And I don't care if you have an R or a D, if you're willing to listen, I share the information. I would continue to do that with the new administration.
That's awesome. And appreciate you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for letting me
be
be
with
here
us,
today.
man.
It's nice to be back in San Diego and see a
Yeah.
bunch of friendly faces too.
Yeah, well, come back anytime, man. We appreciate that. And just sharing your story. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is that within our church, but even just as believers, there are so many people in influential positions across our country that continue to need our prayers. For one, we got to pray for those leaders. I mean, that's whether they're believers or not, we're supposed to pray for our leaders.
Correct.
And that's something that we got to continue to do, especially as our country continues to go in this direction. We want to hope, we want to pray, and we want to see change. But as we mentioned, we know the end is coming at some point, and we're not to just get in a bunker and be like, oh no, it's coming. We're supposed to be out in the front lines praying and fighting for righteousness and what's right.
I appreciate that. Can I end with a little
Yeah,
shout
absolutely.
out? I'd hate myself if I didn't.
Yeah.
Here in San Diego, it's really hard for law enforcement. It's harder and harder for law enforcement, especially border security, whether it be Customs and Border Protection or Border Patrol, to go to church. I talked to a lot of the guys. Thank you for Skyline for being a safe, supportive place for them. There's probably more agents and officers that go to church here than you know. Shout out to them. Stay safe, keep up the fight, spread the word. But also for anybody watching this, don't discount how hurtful it is for people to basically accuse Border Patrol or law enforcement in general of being like these hideous individuals. They live in your community. They go to this church, and let's just say like they're human and they make mistakes. They're going to make a lot less mistakes, and they're going to act better if they're in church, if they're getting the core value. But they need to feel welcomed in the church. Yeah. So thank you for making sure Skyline is one of those places. I know even the military, I hear a lot of feedback that they know that this is a very supportive, and you're not sugarcoating anything, right?
Yeah, we're going to tell
It's
the truth.
still the actual truth. It's the message of the Bible. It's God's word, but it's done in a way that supports law and order.
Appreciate that. And anybody out there watching or listening to this, your law enforcement, any segment, we have a lot of them here. This is one of the safest places to be in the world on a Sunday, I promise you that. And of course, we have our sheriffs next door, and they're in the cafe quite a bit. But anyone out there, man, come. This is a place for you. We're going to support you and do anything we can to help you, because we love you and we appreciate you so much. So thank you. Appreciate it, Rodney.
Thank you.
God bless
Pastor.
you, man.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Faith and Culture. Until next time, God bless you guys.